All right, Julie, what is your fourth tip for us, please?
So again, back to Gemma Sherwood with her wonderful subject knowledge enhancement book here. Lots of post-it notes in that one. Fluency in the 4 operations is the cornerstone of developing mathematical understanding. That's what Gemma tells us, and she's so right. We wouldn't build a house on dodgy foundations, so we can't build a mathematician without that solid base. The Latin word fluentum, fluency, fluentum, means to flow. We want the maths to flow. So we can't do that unless we tackle, because of the hierarchical nature of mathematics, we've got to tackle those 9 basics of maths. I think Mark McCourt refers to it as the numerosity. We've got a lot of debate at the moment about renaming maths, numeracy, all of those kind of things. You can call it, I tweeted this morning very irreverently, you could call it doggy doodah, whatever, I don't care, it's still maths. It's not going to, opal fruits are not starburst, it's just a renaming thing. The difficulties are not going to go away. What will tackle the maths anxiety and the fear of maths and the loathing of maths, because I do see it a lot with post-16 learners. Lauren Reed, after 9 attempts, you can imagine how she felt about her maths, but she did it in the end. So it's about shoring up those basics. That's the first thing to do, and I would suspect that's the case for a lot of learners. They will make those numpty mathematical errors with the easiest questions. So there's even evidence from George Polyer from the 50s, that problem solving is hampered if solving the problem is distracted by an easier question within the problem. So it relieves, it frees up some working memory for the harder stuff as well, if they're fluent in their times tables, for example. Gemma talks exactly about that. If they're stuck on 9 times 8 and have to start writing out the 9 times tables, they're gone off the boil with the meatier problem that they're trying to do. One of the greatest resources that I love is the work of William Emeny, his wonderful posters about You've Never Seen a Curriculum Quite Like This, and it consists of 2 posters, and it's like a space diagram really, with lots of nodes. There's 184 nodes with the connections between each nodes, and that's the GCSE maths curriculum. Then the second poster has all of the labels on, so it shows what underpins each topic, and the more connections the topic has, the bigger the node. And what lies at the heart of mathematical curriculum? Addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, fractions, decimals, percentages, scale and ratio. Pete Mattock, here's his book. Pete Mattock, get yourself a PD library, that's another top tip. A PD library, absolutely invaluable, because you can just go to wherever the evidence is. Pete Mattock tells us the difficulty that students have in the space between 0 and 1, that's your fractions, decimals and percentages. And Ed Southall, must mention Ed, Yes But Why, in his book talks about the unpredictability of negative numbers in addition and subtraction and multiplication and division. So the more work we can do on those, actually everything subsequent to that, standard form for example, becomes easier and faster. So it's a way of speeding up that curriculum by shoring up those basics. As I've said, with times tables, that Mark McCourt says there's no single activity or task that will lead to pupils fully learning their times tables. It's exposure in multifarious ways. On his Complete Mathematics website, he's got a lovely tool for times tables, which brings in the area model, which brings in all sorts of different connotations, different ways of doing mathematical, the method. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm going with those 9 basics are fundamental to building those cornerstones, as Gemma refers to it.
This is great. Well, I've 2 questions, but they're quite big questions. So the first one, you've alluded to it a little bit here, but how to do it, Julie? What are some of the go-to either resources or approaches to kind of get these 9 skills or areas or concepts in place?
So one of the things that I wrote for AQA a few years ago was the basic skills tests, which were primarily for resit learners to quickly ascertain There's set 1, set 2 and set 3. They're readily available, and there also is an online version of it I'll tell you about. They're readily available on AQA Maths. They will tell us very, very quickly. There's teacher guidance on there that I wrote. They'll tell you very, very quickly, within 10 minutes, if there's a difficulty in a particular area. And those are the first ones to start with. So it's about initial assessment. MathSpot, Johnny at MathSpot, I took these to Johnny and said, is there any chance we could have an online version of it? And I know that in the GCSE resources, that's a really popular resource for students to go to for these practice opportunities, but also for teachers to use with them to ascertain where some difficulties might lie within those basics. There's no point in going on to area and volume calculations if they've got difficulty in multiplying and dividing. So it's about quick analysis of those skills, and then regular practice through different media. So the World of Transom Games has some wonderful bits and pieces on there. You Can't Do Simple Maths Under Pressure is a wonderful game which will develop that mathematical fluency. So it's about clever resourcing. It's about resources as well that don't need usernames and logins, because that's the excuse they will use. We've got we've got teachers all over the country, and schools all over the country, and colleges putting on revision sessions now, and they're not coming. They're not coming. So we've got to work with them. We've got to give them online bits and pieces that they can use. It might be a game, it might be the Times Tables little app on Complete Maths. Johnny's old site, studymaths.co.uk, has got 6 little lovely games on there using negative numbers, the Times Tables dash. You can tell I use all these things the whole time, and it is about emphasising to learners, sharing this with the learners as well, showing them why have we gone back to addition of fractions, why have we gone back to the basics, because actually it will speed you up and make you much better at the harder stuff, because you'll have more work and memory to deal with the problem solving, because you don't have to worry about what 9 times 8 is. So I'm absolutely rabid about this one as well. I think it's really at the heart of the 5 R's curriculum as well, which does suit year 10s, year 11s as well. I know that. Right.
Well, here's the big question then, Julie. So I'll build up to this. So one thing I always get whenever I'm working with maths teachers or departments is I always say, look, it's really important to assess prerequisite knowledge before you do a new idea. And the comeback I always get is, I don't have time. Like, what do I do if I assess it and that knowledge isn't secure? I then don't have time to fix it because I've got to teach the kind of rest of the lesson. I've got a scheme of work to follow. Now, I imagine that problem is exacerbated for GCSE research teachers because you've got all this GCSE curriculum to cover. But let's take those 9 areas, or even just the 4 operations. If they're not secure, you kind of almost can't move on. But then how do you ever teach anything? So, yeah, do you know what I mean? Like, can we move on, but in a certain way that we keep revisiting things, or can we not move on? It's a tricky one, isn't it?
It is a tricky one, but I'm just reminded of that phrase that teaching without learning is just talking, isn't it? What's the point of going on to standard form if they haven't understood indices and place value? What's the point? We have to take it right back. However, there is a part that learners can play as well. So if the practice opportunities that you're putting in front of them and encouraging them to use, but not tracking it and not collecting in results, because we know that, as you yourself have said in your book, that we take away those things in the low stakes quizzing kind of approaches, that quizzes are an informative essential part of every session as well. They're not just there if we've got time. Access Maths, he's got some wonderful resources on his website where you have a central problem. It's a pentagon problem, but there are the 5 essential prerequisites around it. So you've got the opportunity to either dive straight into the question, if you're confident you can have a go, or let's build up the 5 prerequisites. Let's do those exercises first, see where the block might be, and then you'll be able to access the area. But I think there's a lot of good messaging here that we can have with learners, and as Dylan Williams says, make them the architect of their own learning. They have got a role to play. With resitters, they just think, well, they should come to lessons. Attendance is an issue, but if they are there, they just think it's something that happens to them, and they develop this maths skills by osmosis. The only way to get good at maths is by doing a shed load of maths. Daily maths is really going to help you. here's about the easiest way that you can do to develop those skills. But share the research with them. Tell them the practice tells us that this, that and the other. Tell them the story of Lauren Reed, and it's hard work. So not only were we teaching a curriculum, she had the persistence, the resilience, the tenacity that is really difficult to engender in those learners, isn't it? If you get so frustrated if after 7 years of adding two fractions together, or doing multiplication of decimals, or subtracting two negatives, 7 years of doing that, after a time you are going to get frustrated, aren't you? So for us as teachers as well, it's about revisioning it, doing revision, going back over the topic, but seeing it differently, and maybe interleaving it, as with Interwoven Maths, which is my new favourite website, along with Starting Point Maths, being very clever with the choice of resource as well, that will allow us to do two things at once. But yeah, it's an age-old problem, it really is. But I think it's about clever initial assessment, and then putting the onus on a lot of learners, to do some work for themselves as well.
Fantastic.